I'm about to undergo a complete change in lifestyle. I'm going to get married, have children, get a job, not necessarily in that order. I thought it was time I should settle down. And although I'm looking forward to it, being of an anxious disposition, I find that there are things I'm getting anxious about. One of these is the prospect of getting a job. I've managed to live quite happily without one for a while, having accrued a certain amount of savings which are running out. So what I'm noticing is how that anxiety can get a hold, and I get sucked into it. And in chapter 99 and 100, I get the impression Rama is a bit concerned about people in this situation and what hope is there for them. In chapter 100 he asks about certain types of people. In chapter 99 though, he began by asking about non-human life forms, worms, flies and even trees. What hope is there for them? And Vasistha replied, and in that reply he gave us a list of the things that all sentient beings have in common. Whether you're Indra, the king of the gods, or a worm, we all experience the same attraction, aversion, fear, desire for food and sex, pain and pleasure, and the distress caused by birth and death. So that's quite a solid list. These are our basic drives. So whether you're a god or a worm or a human being, we all experience attraction, aversion, fear, desire for food and sex, pain and pleasure, and the distress caused by birth and death. And basically Vasistha said, well, all these creatures are just getting on with what they have to do. And that's it. And so from this consideration it becomes a consideration of the nature of consciousness. All these things are simply consciousness expressing itself in certain ways, in a variety of ways, from the gods down to the worms, to insects and worms. So we can bring this in. There are these basic drives are the drives with which consciousness gets caught up. And we can also consider the nature of more inert things like trees and rocks. In the trees and the rocks, consciousness does not get caught up with its fundamental notions so much. So we can come back to that part of ourself which isn't caught up in notions so much, which isn't caught up in divisions. And then we can come back to the realization of so-called reality as being of no more substance than a dream. And by reading the Yoga Vasistha in this way, by considering the consciousness of others, we can get back in touch with our own consciousness, because it's all the same consciousness. We get back to our own sense of being and realize the dreamlike nature of the world, and as a side effect of that, anxiety is put to rest, at least for the time being. So in chapter 100, Rama asks about human beings. He asks two questions. One of those questions relates to people who are focused on their body image, basically, or the state of their body. That very much constitutes their reality. And the other type of person is one that's focused on the world, is out there, getting on with things. Rama asked, "There are others, O sage, who hold that since death is inevitable, one should live happily as long as one lives, and that once the body is reduced to ashes, there is nothing which survives. What is their way out of the sorrow inherent in samsara?" So I suppose we could say this is a fairly typical attitude. Death's inevitable, so let's devote ourselves to the pursuit of happiness. Once the body's dead, cremate it, and that's the end of it. Which actually seems quite a reasonable attitude to take, doesn't it? But Rama's assumption is that sorrow underpins their existence. So whether it does or not, let's see what Vasistha has to say. Vasistha replied, "Whatever the inner intelligence firmly believes in, that alone is experienced by it, as if it is obvious." And that's the feeling we've got about our own attitude, isn't it? About our own notions. It's obvious. So when you're pursuing inquiry, it's worth having a look at what you take for granted as obvious, because that's your reality. Consciousness is universal and indivisible. That is one, and that alone is diverse. Nothing else existed before the concept of creation arose. Hence, nothing else is really true. Well, this is true for both the scientist and the religious type, isn't it? Everything begins with the point of creation, with the notion of creation. And both for the religious person and the scientist, creation is reality. This is what is real. Hence, nothing else is really true. They are surely ignorant who do not see the reality that is expounded in the scripture. For as they are as good as dead, they who have realized that all this is pure consciousness do not need our instruction either. So basically, people that have got their faith in this external creation, whether religious person or scientist, aren't going to be able to tune into this teaching, so we don't need to bother about them. We accept that they've got their lives to get on with and leave it at that. However, we really ought to apply this to ourselves, because the chances are this is very much part of our own belief. To what extent are we allowing the belief in the reality of our body or of this external world to dominate our sense of being? So I mentioned my anxiety about looking for a job. That's very much the belief in me here, trying to get something from out there, interacting with the reality out there. So in a way I have to leave it alone, in the sense that I just have to get on and do it, because the teaching doesn't apply to that. I just have to get on and do it. That's the way it is. I have to leave that alone. But at every opportunity I can come back to the realization that all this is pure consciousness, Brahman. It says here that those who realize that all this is pure consciousness do not need our instruction either. But that realization can easily slip. So therefore the Yoga Vasistha is very useful for reminding us. Of course, once we've got that realization, we don't need the Yoga Vasistha. The Yoga Vasistha is a tool for reminding us.